Tommy Cooper was one of Britain's most iconic comedians, instantly recognizable with his towering height, booming voice, and that ever-present red fez perched on his head. With his unique blend of slapstick humor and intentionally clumsy magic tricks, he had a way of making people laugh with his sheer presence alone. But on the evening of April 15th, 1984, what began as another night of entertainment on a live television show quickly turned into one of the most tragic and shocking moments in British broadcast history. That Sunday, Cooper was performing on a popular variety program called Live from Her Majesty's, which was being aired live to millions of viewers on ITV. The show was hosted by Jimmy Tarbuck and featured a number of musical and comedic acts. When Tommy Cooper walked onto the stage, the crowd greeted him with enthusiastic applause. It was just another performance in a long and storied career, or so it seemed. Cooper began his routine in classic fashion, delivering one-liners, fumbling through deliberately terrible magic tricks, and using his imposing frame to great comedic effect. But then, as he was in the middle of a bit involving a cloak and some props handed to him by his assistant, he suddenly staggered backwards and collapsed against the curtain. The fall looked theatrical, almost like part of the act. The audience, familiar with his slapstick antics, burst into laughter, assuming it was just another physical gag from the master of comedic timing. However, after a few seconds, it became evident that something was very wrong. Cooper did not get back up. His assistant, still on stage, appeared visibly confused and concerned. Behind the scenes, stagehands quickly realized that Cooper had suffered a medical emergency. The director of the live broadcast made the quick decision to cut to a commercial break to avoid further confusion and give medical staff time to respond. Backstage, the atmosphere shifted from confusion to panic. Cooper had collapsed from a massive heart attack. Efforts were made to resuscitate him, and paramedics rushed to the scene. Meanwhile, the show continued after the commercial break, with other performers taking the stage. Most of them had no idea what had just happened. The producers decided to carry on with the program to avoid alarming the live audience or the viewers at home. Despite the swift medical response, Tommy Cooper was later pronounced dead at Westminster Hospital. He was 63 years old. The news of his death was not officially announced until after the show had ended, leaving viewers stunned when they learned the truth. Many had been watching in real time and had no idea that the moment they had laughed at was the final moment of a beloved performer's life. The incident had a profound impact on fans, colleagues, and the entertainment industry as a whole. Cooper's sudden death on stage became a haunting reminder of the unpredictability of live performance and the fine line between comedy and tragedy. His legacy, however, has endured. Generations continue to enjoy his performances through old recordings, and he remains a symbol of classic British comedy. Even decades later, the surreal and tragic nature of Tommy Cooper's final performance is remembered as one of the most poignant moments in television history. Though he died doing what he loved, most making people laugh, his final bow was a moment of heartbreaking reality that left a nation in shock and mourning. In June 2025, a troubling incident unfolded on live television as Australian journalist Lauren Tomasi, a U.S. correspondent for 9 News, was struck by a rubber bullet while covering protests in downtown Los Angeles. The protests were a response to controversial immigration enforcement raids and the deployment of federal troops, actions that had sparked widespread civil unrest across several U.S. cities. The moment Tomasi was hit was captured live, drawing immediate concern and sparking international outrage. Tomasi was standing with her camera crew, clearly marked as press, when a law enforcement officer fired a rubber bullet that struck her in the leg. The force of the impact caused her to cry out and momentarily lose balance. The broadcast showed her visibly shaken, while her cameraman moved quickly to get them to safety. Despite the frightening encounter, Tomasi later confirmed she was sore but otherwise okay, and thanked viewers for their support. Her professionalism in the immediate aftermath was widely commended. The incident occurred amid increasing tensions between protesters and law enforcement. The federal government had ordered aggressive crackdowns on protest gatherings, deploying not only LAPD officers but also members of the National Guard and Marines, a move criticized by civil rights advocates and political opponents alike. Reports from the scene indicated that journalists and peaceful demonstrators were caught in the crossfire of escalating crowd control tactics that included rubber bullets, tear gas, and baton charges. Australia's response was swift. Prime Minister Anthony Albanese described the footage as horrific and expressed deep concern over the safety of Australian citizens abroad, especially journalists performing their duties. He emphasized that Tomasi had been clearly identifiable as a member of the media, holding a microphone and reporting live on air. Albanese confirmed that the Australian government raised the matter with U.S. officials and was monitoring developments closely. He reiterated Australia's stance on protecting press freedom, calling for accountability and transparency in how crowd control tactics are implemented. The incident also prompted a response from 9 News Australia, which condemned the attack on its journalist and stated it would fully cooperate with any investigations. The network's CEO, Matt Stanton, said that Lauren Tomasi and her cameraman Jimmy were recovering and being provided with full support. He stressed that no journalist should ever be placed in harm's way while doing their job, especially when clearly marked as press. Australia's Media, Entertainment and Arts Alliance, MEAA, joined the chorus of condemnation, calling for a formal investigation into the use of force against journalists. The union released a statement emphasizing that members of the press are not combatants and must be treated with the same protection as other frontline personnel. This is not just about Lauren Tomasi, the MEAA stated. It is about the broader principle of press freedom and the ability of journalists to work without fear of violence or intimidation. Opposition leaders in Australia, including Senator Sarah Hanson-Young and Karl Stefanovich, echoed these sentiments and called for stronger diplomatic engagement to prevent future incidents of this nature. Some political analysts suggested that the incident could cast a shadow over upcoming diplomatic discussions, including the G7 summit where both Albanese and U.S. President Donald Trump were expected to meet. As of now, the LAPD has launched an internal investigation into the circumstances that led to Tomasi being shot. The department acknowledged public concern and stated that it would examine body cam footage and tactical decisions made during the protest. While Lauren Tomasi has resumed her duties, the episode has reignited debate over the use of non-lethal weapons in protest management and the ongoing risks faced by journalists reporting from conflict zones, even in democratic nations. This incident stands as a stark reminder of the dangers frontline reporters face and the critical importance of protecting journalistic freedom in volatile situations. On September 28, 2012, a routine Fox News broadcast took a shocking turn that would leave a lasting mark on American television history. What started as coverage of a high-speed police chase in Phoenix, Arizona, ended in a tragedy that millions of viewers would never forget. That morning, 33-year-old Jodan Romero, already wanted for a parole violation, stole a car at gunpoint in a Phoenix parking lot. Police quickly began pursuit. Romero raced through city streets, running red lights and putting countless lives at risk. The danger escalated further when he opened fire at officers and even aimed his gun at a news helicopter following overhead. To avoid putting more people in harm's way, police pulled back, using unmarked cars and aerial surveillance to track him. Eventually, Romero drove out of the city and into the Arizona desert. Around this time, Fox News had picked up the live feed, broadcasting the chase to millions. As viewers watched, Romero abandoned his vehicle on a dusty road and began walking aimlessly through the desert. In the studio, anchor Shepard Smith grew increasingly uneasy. "This scares me," he said on air, sensing something was about to go wrong. Then it happened. Without warning, Romero stopped walking, pulled out a handgun, and took his own life on live television. In the Fox News control room, panic erupted. Smith, realizing what was happening, yelled, "Get off! Get off! Get off!" assuming the broadcast delay would give producers time to cut the feed. But the delay didn't work. The footage aired unfiltered. Millions of viewers saw it happen in real time. Moments later, the feed cut to commercial. When Smith returned, he was visibly shaken. He apologized directly to viewers, saying, "We really messed up and we're all very sorry." Fox News later issued a public statement, calling the incident a severe technical and human error. But for Romero's family, especially his children, the damage was irreversible. Romero had 3 kids, ages 9, 13, and 15. They were at school when rumors started spreading about the broadcast. After school, the older boys searched online and discovered the footage. At first, they didn't recognize the man. Then came the horrifying realization. They had just watched their father die. The emotional impact was devastating. Neither boy returned to school. They suffered from nightmares, flashbacks, and deep emotional trauma. Their mother, Angela Rodriguez, later described how their mental health rapidly deteriorated after seeing the footage. She took legal action against Fox News, arguing that their negligence had exposed her children to unimaginable harm. The broadcast ignited national outrage. Critics questioned why such dangerous situations were being aired live with so little oversight. Police chases had long been used to boost ratings, but now the cost was clear. Viewers, especially children, had seen something they never should have. Romero's actions that day were undeniably serious, but the way his life ended, broadcast without warning, sparked a larger debate. How far should news coverage go? What are the responsibilities of media in moments of crisis? For Romero's family, the loss was deeply personal. For the media, it was a wake-up call. And for viewers, it was a moment that can never be unseen. In 2011, Britain lost one of its most recognizable television personalities. Jimmy Savile, the eccentric entertainer, the tireless philanthropist, the man who had raised millions for charity, was gone at the age of 84. His funeral was a spectacle, a nation mourning a man who had spent decades bringing joy to audiences and helping the sick and vulnerable. He was knighted, celebrated, a fixture of British culture. But behind the glowing tributes, behind the headlines of admiration, an unsettling question lingered, because for years there had been whispers, hushed conversations, unspoken doubts, rumors that never seemed to gain traction. And then, after his death, something cracked. The whispers grew louder. The rumors became confessions. Investigators began pulling at a thread, and what they uncovered sent shockwaves through the entire country. Jimmy Savile, the beloved television host, had spent decades hiding in plain sight. Under the guise of charity work and entertainment, he had preyed upon the young, the vulnerable, the sick. His crimes weren't just disturbing, they were almost unthinkable. By the time the truth fully emerged, the numbers were staggering. Over 500 victims. For years, Savile had been best known for Jim'll Fix It, a family-friendly show where he granted children's wishes. Millions saw him as the quirky, oddball presenter with his signature tracksuits and oversized jewelry. But away from the cameras, away from the bright studio lights, he was something else entirely. He had built his entire career on trust that he twisted and exploited with chilling precision. He had positioned himself where few would question him. In the 1960s, he began volunteering at Leeds General Infirmary, a children's hospital. He wasn't just a visitor, he became a fixture. He raised money, took a part-time job as a porter, gained unrestricted access to patients, and no one suspected a thing, or at least, no one spoke up. One victim, a 14-year-old boy in a wheelchair, recalled how Savile casually approached him, made a joke, then crossed a line that shattered the boy's trust forever. This wasn't an isolated incident. It was a pattern. A chilling, calculated pattern that repeated itself over and over. Savile's career flourished. He became the host of Top of the Pops, Britain's biggest music show, where young female dancers performed weekly. The energy was electric, the music was loud, but behind the scenes, something sinister was happening. In 1976, during a live broadcast, a teenage girl named Sylvia Edwards felt a sudden, unwelcome touch. She turned, horrified, and saw Savile grinning. She tried to report it. No one listened. Why? How had he gotten away with it for so long? The answer was as disturbing as the crimes themselves. Jimmy Savile wasn't just a celebrity. He was a protected figure. He had powerful friends. He had connections within the BBC, within the police, even within the royal family. He wasn't just a television host. He was an advisor to Prince Charles, a man who had influence over public policies, who had the ear of people at the highest levels of society. For decades, people suspected. Staff at hospitals whispered about his behavior. BBC employees exchanged knowing looks, but Savile was untouchable. He was Sir Jimmy Savile. He was the man who raised millions for sick children. Who would dare accuse him? It wasn't until after his death that the full horror of his crimes was revealed. As police investigated, survivors who had once been silenced began to speak out, and the more they spoke, the more the scale of his abuse became undeniable. This wasn't just about children. Saville's victims spanned generations, from 5-year-old children to 75-year-old hospital patients. Women, men, the young, the elderly. No one had been safe. He had used charity work as his shield, his fame as his weapon, and the most chilling part, he had never even tried to hide. In 2013, an official report confirmed what many had feared. At least 60 victims at Leeds General Infirmary alone, hundreds more across the country, a legacy of devastation, concealed for decades by a culture of silence and willful ignorance. Even after death, Saville's crimes forced the nation to reckon with an uncomfortable truth. He had been allowed to operate unchecked, because no one wanted to believe he could be guilty. Victims had spoken, but they had been dismissed. Allegations had surfaced, but they had been buried. The fallout was immense. Investigations uncovered not just his crimes, but the complicity of institutions that had enabled him. The BBC, the hospitals, the authorities who had failed to act, the people who had looked away. For the survivors, justice came too late. Saville was gone. He would never stand trial, he would never answer for his crimes, but his exposure shattered the illusion that powerful figures were beyond scrutiny, and it forced Britain to confront a bitter, haunting question. How many others waiting for the world to look away? When millions of viewers settled in to watch the 2001 Daytona 500, they expected the usual mix of high-speed excitement, last-lap strategy, and the familiar electric atmosphere that comes with live NASCAR broadcasts. But what unfolded in front of their eyes on live television became one of the most shocking and defining moments in motorsport history. The final lap should have been a triumphant moment for Dale Earnhardt, the 7-time champion whose reputation as the Intimidator made him a towering figure in the sport. Instead, the world watched in real time as a seemingly routine late-race collision resulted in the tragedy that would shake NASCAR to its core. Viewers saw it exactly as it happened. No editing, no delay, no chance to process or prepare. Just the raw, unfiltered reality of live sports, where the line between spectacle and danger can disappear in an instant. As the field stormed through Turn 4, Earnhardt's number 3 Chevrolet was locked in tight defensive maneuvers protecting the lead of his teammates Michael Waltrip and his son Dale Earnhardt Jr. The camera caught every detail: the tension, the crowded pack, the subtle contact between cars that fans had watched countless times without consequence. But then, in a split second, Sterling Marlin's car touched the left rear of Earnhardt's, nudging him upward toward the outside wall. The impact that followed did not look explosive or dramatic. It was not the fiery crash or tumbling wreck people often associate with severe injuries. It was quick, direct, and chillingly understated, and because it happened live, millions witnessed the moment without realizing its severity. Broadcasters still focused on the finish ahead, offered only brief concern, and at home, viewers waited for the usual reassuring sign that the driver was okay. But instead of relief, a growing sense of unease spread through the broadcast. The cameras eventually turned back to the wrecked number 3 car still and silent against the wall, and the tone of the commentators shifted noticeably as the gravity of the situation began to set in. On live TV, the celebration of the race winner unfolded awkwardly alongside the unfolding emergency, creating a surreal and unsettling contrast that made the moment even more unforgettable. As minutes passed, the tension deepened. Pit crews exchanged anxious looks, and officials clustered around the scene, and the broadcast, usually loud and energetic after a Daytona finish, took on an uncharacteristically somber quiet. Viewers at home could feel that something was terribly wrong, and when the official announcement came later confirming that Dale Earnhardt had suffered fatal injuries in the crash, it marked not only the devastating loss of a racing icon, but also a turning point in the way NASCAR and its fans understood the risks of the sport. The fact that this tragedy played out live in real time before the eyes of millions magnified its impact and cemented it in the collective memory of anyone who witnessed it. It was a moment that forced NASCAR to confront the vulnerabilities of its drivers and ultimately led to sweeping safety reforms that have saved countless lives since. Still, for those who watched the event unfold as it happened, the memory remains vivid. A stark reminder of how quickly a familiar Sunday afternoon broadcast can shift from celebration to heartbreak, and how one live moment can change an entire sport forever. On the morning of January 28, 1986, America tuned in with a rare, united sense of anticipation. It was a day that was supposed to mark a hopeful new chapter in space exploration, a mission not just for science, but for inspiration. The Space Shuttle Challenger, set to embark on mission STS-51L, carried 7 astronauts, including a schoolteacher named Krista McAuliffe, who was selected from thousands to become the first civilian and educator in space. For millions of students across the country, her presence transformed this launch into a personal event. Classrooms paused lessons to watch it live. Parents, educators, and the press rallied around the idea that this was a turning point, a blending of space science and public engagement. But within 73 seconds of liftoff, that hopeful moment dissolved into horror as the Challenger broke apart in midair, a bright fireball suddenly replacing the elegant arc of the shuttle's ascent. What looked like an explosion unfolded in front of stunned eyes. Viewers, including children, teachers, and news anchors, were struck silent as the twin booster rockets spiraled off course and a twisted cloud of smoke remained where a proud vehicle had just been. There were no survivors. The crew, Commander Francis Scobie, pilot Michael J. Smith, mission specialists Ronald McNair, Ellison Onizuka, and Judith Resnick, payload specialist Gregory Jarvis, and Krista McAuliffe had been lost in what was later revealed to be a preventable catastrophe. Investigations showed that the cause of the failure was a faulty O-ring seal in the right solid rocket booster. These rings, essentially rubber gaskets designed to prevent hot gas from escaping, had become brittle in the unusually cold Florida morning. The night before the launch, temperatures had dropped below freezing, a rarity for the area. Engineers at Morton Thiokol, the manufacturer of the boosters, expressed serious concerns. Some pleaded with NASA to postpone the launch, warning that the O-rings might not hold. But amid immense schedule pressure, public attention, and political stakes, NASA officials pressed forward. When the shuttle launched, the O-rings failed almost immediately, allowing hot gases to escape and burn through the external fuel tank. This led to the structural disintegration of the shuttle, not an explosion in the Hollywood sense, but a collapse of the vehicle under extreme aerodynamic forces. The Rogers Commission, formed by President Reagan to investigate the disaster, laid bare a haunting combination of technical flaws and organizational failures. It wasn't just the hardware, it was the culture. Engineers had known for years that the O-rings had issues. Warnings were raised but routinely dismissed or downplayed. The commission exposed a communication breakdown within NASA where concerns from lower-level engineers never reached decision-makers or were actively suppressed. The result was a tragedy not born of chance, but of complacency. The Challenger disaster sent shockwaves through NASA and the country. Shuttle missions were suspended for nearly 3 years. There was a deep reevaluation of safety protocols, risk communication, and organizational decision-making. Krista McAuliffe's dream of teaching from space never came to life, but her legacy reshaped how space exploration would be approached moving forward. The Challenger's crew is now remembered not just for how they died, but for why they flew, to explore, to teach, to push boundaries. It remains one of the most powerful reminders that in the pursuit of greatness, caution, honesty, and accountability are not optional, they are essential. It was an ordinary Tuesday afternoon in Guayaquil, Ecuador, when the unexpected unfolded on live television. Viewers tuned in to TC television expecting regular news coverage, only to witness a chilling reality play out before their eyes. Around 2 p.m., a group of 13 masked and heavily armed men stormed the live broadcast studio. They carried guns, grenades, and even dynamite, creating a terrifying scene of chaos and fear. The staff were forced to the floor, and the intruders demanded airtime to issue threatening messages. The broadcast continued briefly, capturing the tension as one cameraman was shot in the leg and another suffered a broken arm. This was not a performance or a prank. It was a calculated act of aggression that exposed the growing boldness of criminal groups in the country. Viewers watched in disbelief as what should have been an afternoon news segment turned into a hostage crisis broadcast to thousands across the nation. It marked a turning point not just in Ecuador's media history, but in the broader struggle the country was facing with organized crime and escalating violence. Authorities acted swiftly. Within approximately 20 to 40 minutes, tactical police units and military forces stormed the studio in a high-stakes rescue operation. Hostages were freed and all 13 assailants were taken into custody. The intervention was swift and decisive, bringing the dangerous situation to an end without further loss of life, yet the message had already been sent. The incident was more than a violent act. It was symbolic. It showed how far criminal organizations were willing to go to instill fear and exert control, even over national broadcasts. Ecuador had already been grappling with rising violence, sparked by the recent escape of Adolfo Fito Macias, a notorious gang leader linked to drug trafficking and prison riots. This televised siege added fuel to a growing fire. The government responded by declaring a nationwide state of emergency. President Daniel Noboa also labeled 22 criminal gangs as terrorist groups and authorized military action against them. This marked a shift in the country's approach to combating organized crime, moving toward a more aggressive and militarized response to a crisis that had long been brewing beneath the surface. The aftermath was significant. TC Television ceased operations for 2 days, and many journalists involved in the incident reported trauma, including anchor Jose Luis Calderon, who later spoke about seeking psychological support. The attack left a lasting impression on the public, raising urgent questions about safety, media freedom, and the state's ability to protect its institutions. It also forced a reevaluation of how Ecuador confronts the growing power of gangs and the influence they hold over both urban and rural areas. Internationally, the event drew concern and offers of assistance, including from the United States. Meanwhile, Ecuador intensified its border security, cracked down on gang operations, and increased military presence in key regions. What began as a shocking interruption on live television quickly became a national emergency, revealing the depth of the country's internal conflict. The studio takeover was more than a violent outburst. It was a clear sign that the battle between state authority and criminal organizations had entered a new and more dangerous phase. And for the people of Ecuador, it served as both a wake-up call and a chilling reminder of the stakes involved in reclaiming public safety. It was the evening of September 2nd, 2011, and millions of Chileans were tuned into Calle Siete, a popular game show, expecting another light-hearted night of entertainment. But suddenly, their screens went dark. A serious news anchor appeared, delivering a message that stunned the nation. A Chilean Air Force aircraft had disappeared over the Pacific Ocean. The plane, a Casa C-212, had been carrying 21 people, including beloved television host Felipe Camiroaga and journalist Roberto Bruce. It vanished near Robinson Crusoe Island, a remote spot far off Chile's coast. What started as a routine relief mission ended in one of the country's most heartbreaking tragedies. The aircraft had departed from Santiago earlier that day, part of a humanitarian effort to document reconstruction work after the devastating 2010 earthquake. The team from TVN, Chile's national broadcaster, was traveling to highlight how communities were rebuilding. On board were TV crew members, businessman Felipe Cubillos, and others dedicated to the cause. As the plane approached the island, the weather turned treacherous. Heavy rain and fierce winds made landing nearly impossible. The pilots aborted 2 landing attempts due to poor visibility. On their third try, communication was lost. Minutes later, the plane vanished from radar. Rescue teams mobilized immediately. Local fishermen joined the search, combing the seas in hopes of finding survivors. But as hours passed and no one was found, hopes began to fade. The Chilean government soon confirmed the worst. There were no survivors. The loss was felt deeply across the country. Felipe Camiroaga wasn't just a TV host. He was a national icon. Known for his charm, generosity, and genuine warmth, he had become a fixture in Chilean households. His morning show Buenos Dias a Todos was a daily comfort to millions. The idea that he, and others like Roberto Bruce, were suddenly gone was unthinkable. Newsrooms were paralyzed. TVN colleagues struggled to continue broadcasting, breaking down on air. Across Chile, people gathered to mourn. Outside TVN headquarters, candles were lit, flowers laid, and tears flowed freely. Then came a haunting discovery. Among the wreckage, divers found a memory card, carefully sealed in a water bottle. It belonged to Romina Irarazabal, a photographer who had been on the flight. Miraculously, the card survived. On it were 409 images, including 6 taken during the final moments. One showed the plane's cabin floor, another captured water rising against a window. Somehow, Romina had sensed what was coming and preserved a final glimpse of their journey. Investigators later concluded that sudden wind gusts and turbulence caused the plane to lose stability. It was flying low and slow, conditions that left little room for error. The aircraft crashed into the ocean, its wreckage scattered across the seafloor. The aftermath was devastating. Recovery efforts continued for months. Some victims' bodies were found, others never were, but the emotional toll had already been etched into the heart of the nation. The 2011 Casa C-212 crash wasn't just a tragic accident. It was a moment that united a grieving country. It took away familiar faces, voices that had comforted and inspired. Today, their memory still lingers, in the photos Romina left behind, in every tribute aired, and in the hearts of a country that will never forget. June 14, 2008. Miyazaki, Japan. A live television broadcast was in full swing, the air electric with laughter and excitement. Jaga Jaga Tangoku, a beloved show known for celebrating local traditions with a playful twist, had something special planned for the day. The cameras zoomed in on a muddy rice field where butt sumo, a chaotic, comedic competition, was about to unfold. The goal was not to win, but to get as covered in mud as possible. Yanagita Tetsushi, a charismatic television announcer, was there to cover the event. Ever the entertainer, he wasn't content to simply report. He wanted to be part of the fun. Without hesitation, he made a decision that would change his life forever. He dove forward, head first into the muddy water, aiming to fully submerge himself for the audience's amusement. The crowd cheered, expecting another moment of light-hearted television gold. But the laughter died almost instantly. Beneath the murky surface, the soft mud he expected wasn't there. Instead, the ground was solid, unyielding, waiting. His body struck it with a sickening crack. A violent jolt shot through his spine. In an instant, everything stopped. No movement, no sound. The cameras kept rolling. The crowd kept cheering. No one realized, not yet, that something had gone horribly wrong. Even his co-host, unaware of the disaster unfolding before him, approached laughing and poured more mud onto Yanagita's head. But he didn't react. He didn't laugh. He couldn't. The weight of the moment settled in. Something was very wrong. Crew members rushed over, shaking him, calling his name. But shaking a man with a possible spinal injury? A mistake that could have made things even worse. The cheers turned to gasps, then to silence. The show was no longer entertainment. It had become a nightmare. Paramedics arrived in a blur of sirens and urgency, rushing Yanagita to a hospital in Kumamoto. Every second felt like an eternity. When the doctors spoke, their words shattered the world around them. Severe cervical spine injury, a 99% chance of permanent paralysis. Just like that, the vibrant, energetic announcer, a man who had spent his life bringing joy to others, was told he might never move again. But even in that moment, his thoughts weren't for himself. His first words after regaining consciousness weren't about his own condition. "Please," he whispered, "take care of my mother." A son's love, still stronger than his pain. For most, the story would have ended there, a tragedy, a cautionary tale. But Yanagita refused to let his fate be written for him. The battle that followed was unlike anything he had ever faced. His body, once so full of energy, now fought against him at every turn. Even sitting up became a struggle. His blood pressure would plummet, causing him to faint. The simplest movements seemed impossible, but he fought on. 1 year after the accident, he lifted his arm, just a few centimeters. To most, it would have seemed like nothing. To him, it was everything. It was hope. It was proof that he wasn't done. 10 months after the accident, he returned home in a wheelchair. But home wasn't the end of his journey. It was just another battleground. He pushed through grueling therapy, retraining his body to perform basic tasks most people take for granted. Shaving, typing, holding a pen. Each small victory was a war won. And then, against all odds, he returned to television. 3 years after the accident in 2011, he appeared on live TV once again. For the first time since the fall, millions saw his face, not as a tragic figure but as a man who had fought his way back. His body was different, but his spirit was unchanged, and he didn't stop there. In 2012, he became a regular on Mapos, the successor show to Jaga Jaga Tangoku. His voice was back, his presence was back, his passion was back. His story is not just one of survival, it's a story of defiance, a story of a man who refused to stay down, a story of a voice that, even when silenced, found a way to be heard again. What if he had given up? Would we have witnessed this incredible comeback? Would we have seen a broken body defy the odds, fueled by sheer will? His journey is a reminder to us all. No fall, no matter how devastating, has to be the end of the story. On the morning of August 26, 2015, viewers of WDBJ7 News in Roanoke, Virginia, tuned in for what they thought would be a routine, light-hearted segment, a live interview at the scenic Smith Mountain Lake. The sun was shining, the water glistened, and the community seemed to be enjoying a quiet summer day. But what was meant to be an ordinary broadcast would soon become a moment seared into the memory of the nation. In an instant, Allison Parker, a vibrant 24-year-old reporter, and Adam Ward, her talented 27-year-old cameraman, were ambushed on live television. The horrifying scene unfolded before countless viewers, turning a familiar, everyday setting into a chilling tableau of violence. The incident was not just a local tragedy, it became a national shock, precisely because it happened on live TV, forcing audiences to witness the unthinkable in real time. There was no warning, no editing, no delay. Millions watched helplessly as a former co-worker, armed and angry, approached the team and opened fire, leaving Parker and Ward dead and a community forever changed. Live television is designed to bring immediacy and intimacy to viewers. It thrives on spontaneity, whether it is capturing breaking news, heartwarming human interest stories, or stunning natural landscapes. But that very immediacy can also amplify tragedy, as it did on that fateful morning. The attack on Allison and Adam underscored a terrifying truth. In the era of constant connectivity, violence can be broadcast instantly, leaving no buffer between reality and audience. Unlike incidents captured after the fact, this shooting unfolded in real time, magnifying its horror. Viewers did not just hear about the tragedy, they saw it happen, which made the pain and shock feel inescapable. The medium transformed the event, creating a visceral impact far beyond the local community, as social media and news outlets spread clips and images worldwide. The perpetrator, Vester Lee Flanagan II, a former WDBJ employee who went by the professional name Bryce Williams, had a history of grievances against the station and its staff. While personal motives and workplace conflicts were at the heart of his actions, it was the very public nature of the attack that captured global attention. The fact that he chose a live broadcast as the stage for his violence added a layer of calculated cruelty. No longer was the tragedy confined to private lives, it became a public spectacle, a horrifying broadcast that forced viewers to confront the fragility of life and the dangers that can erupt even in familiar, everyday settings. In the aftermath, the WDBJ-7 shooting sparked national discussions on workplace violence, gun control, and the safety of journalists, particularly those working in the field. It also raised complex ethical questions about how media handles graphic live content. When tragedy is unfiltered and immediate, what responsibilities do broadcasters have? How does an audience process the trauma of seeing such events unfold in real time? Allison Parker and Adam Ward's deaths were not just a loss of life. They were a stark reminder of the unpredictable dangers journalists face and the ways in which modern technology can transform private violence into a public nightmare. The events at Smith Mountain Lake serve as a haunting testament to the fragility of life and the vulnerability inherent in live broadcasting. What began as a sunny, ordinary morning ended in national shock, leaving an indelible mark on journalism, media ethics, and public consciousness. The shooting of Allison Parker and Adam Ward remains a solemn warning. In a world where cameras are always rolling and news is always live, tragedy can strike at any moment, and millions may witness it as it happens. On the morning of July 15, 1974, in the small city of Sarasota, Florida, a young television journalist named Christine Chubbuck arrived at WXLT-TV, Channel 40, carrying a bag that held more than just scripts. She was calm, composed, and even joked with her colleagues before going live on air. What they didn't know was that Christine had spent weeks preparing for what would become one of the most shocking and tragic moments in broadcast history. She would take her own life, live on television. Christine wasn't your average local news anchor. She was smart, serious about her work, and often clashed with station management over their preference for sensational, violent stories. She believed in meaningful journalism, not just blood, guts, and car crashes. Ironically, that was exactly the kind of content her station was chasing, and exactly what she referenced before ending her life. That morning, during the broadcast of Suncoast Digest, a public affairs show she usually hosted, Christine read a few local news items. Then, without changing her tone or demeanor, she looked into the camera and said, "In keeping with Channel 40's policy of bringing you the latest in blood and guts and in living color, you are going to see another first, attempted suicide." Before anyone could react, Christine pulled out a .38 caliber Smith & Wesson revolver from beneath her desk, placed it behind her right ear, and pulled the trigger. The screen quickly faded to black. Viewers at home were left stunned, and in the studio, chaos broke out. Her co-workers initially thought it might be a dark joke or a twisted stunt, but when they reached her and saw the severity of the wound, the horrifying reality hit. Christine was rushed to Sarasota Memorial Hospital, where she remained in critical condition for 14 hours before succumbing to her injury. She was just 29 years old. This wasn't a spur-of-the-moment act. Christine had been suffering from severe depression for years. She had even been seeing a psychiatrist, though her family said they didn't realize how deep her struggles truly were. She lived at home with her parents and had often expressed feelings of loneliness and frustration, especially over her lack of social connections and romantic relationships. Just weeks before the incident, she told a colleague she had bought a gun and planned to do something crazy. They thought she was joking. Christine had gone as far as to write a complete script for that day's broadcast, including a post-shooting bulletin to be read by another anchor. In it, she even included her condition and the name of the hospital she would be taken to. She had also requested to do a special segment on suicide not long before her death, hoping to interview local officials about prevention and mental health. The request was denied. After her death, the network and station were heavily criticized, not only for their content policies, but for failing to recognize the signs. However, Christine had been deliberate in hiding the full extent of her intentions. The video of her final broadcast was never aired again. Only one known tape existed, which was turned over to her family and later reportedly destroyed. Christine Chubbuck's tragic final act left behind more than shock. It sparked vital conversations about mental illness, media ethics, and the human cost of sensational news. Her story was later retold in documentaries and dramatized in the critically acclaimed 2016 film Christine. Today, her name is often remembered alongside discussions about suicide awareness, the pressures of journalism, and the importance of recognizing cries for help, even when they're masked by a smile and a sign on script. In 1984, a case out of Baton Rouge, Louisiana, shocked the nation and raised questions that are still debated to this day, questions about justice, vengeance, and the limits of human restraint. It all began when 11-year-old Jody Plosh, a bright and athletic young boy, was abducted by his 25-year-old karate instructor, Jeff Doucet. What seemed like a trusting mentorship turned into a nightmare when Doucet, abusing his position of power, kidnapped Jody and took him on a cross-country trip to a motel in California. During this time, Doucet not only kept Jody hidden from his panicked family and authorities, but he also allegedly sexually assaulted him, a revelation that would horrify any parent. When the FBI finally located them and brought Jody home safely, relief swept through the Plosh family. But for Jody's father, Gary, something darker was brewing beneath the surface. Gary wasn't just relieved, he was enraged. While most parents might place their faith in the justice system, Gary's faith had been shattered by the unthinkable trauma inflicted on his son. And so, as Doucet was being extradited back to Baton Rouge to face charges, Gary made a decision that would burn his name into history books and public memory forever. On March 16, 1984, Gary arrived at the Baton Rouge Metropolitan Airport with a small-caliber revolver hidden under his jacket. He positioned himself near a row of payphones, wearing a baseball cap and dark glasses, pretending to be just another guy making a call. What he was really doing was waiting for the man who had stolen his son's innocence. As Doucet walked through the airport, flanked by law enforcement officers, TV news cameras rolling, Gary turned around, raised his gun, and fired a single shot into the side of Doucet's head. The moment was so sudden, so precise, that it stunned the police officers right next to him and shocked viewers who would later see it play out on television. Doucet collapsed instantly, and although he was rushed to the hospital, he died the next day. Gary was immediately arrested on the scene, but public opinion was anything but unanimous. Many Americans viewed Gary's actions as understandable, even justifiable, a grieving, outraged father taking justice into his own hands. Others argued that no matter how emotionally charged the circumstances, vigilante violence couldn't be tolerated in a society built on rule of law. In a remarkable twist, the court seemed to lean toward mercy. Gary Ploche was charged with second-degree murder but ended up pleading no contest to a reduced charge of manslaughter. The sentence? 7 years suspended, 5 years probation, and 300 hours of community service. He served not a single day in prison. While some critics were disturbed by what they saw as a lenient punishment, others saw it as a compassionate response to a man pushed to his psychological limits. The event lives on today in true crime documentaries, ethics classrooms, and viral video compilations as people continue to argue, was Gary a hero, a criminal, or something in between? In later interviews, Gary expressed regret not for feeling anger, but for the action he took, acknowledging that violence, even in vengeance, comes with a heavy burden. Jody, now grown, has spoken openly about the ordeal and has said he forgave his father, understanding the torment that led him to that moment. It remains a chilling yet deeply human story of pain, of justice, of a father's love pushed to the edge. It was January 11th, 2001, in Rio de Janeiro, Brazil, a day that was supposed to be filled with laughter and fun. On the set of Xuxa Park, one of the most beloved children's TV shows in the country, cameras rolled as Brazilian pop icon Xuxa Meneghel performed for a live audience of nearly 300 people, mostly excited kids. The set looked like a vibrant amusement park, with giant props, colorful rides, and playful characters. It was a world designed to delight, but everything changed in an instant. As Xuxa and her dancers performed the show's final musical number, a small fire broke out in one of the show's signature props, a large spaceship used for grand entrances. At first, it didn't seem serious. A crew member grabbed a fire extinguisher to put it out, but instead of dying down, the fire spread fast, feeding on the plastic decorations that covered the set. Within seconds, flames were everywhere. Thick black smoke filled the studio, making it almost impossible to see or breathe. Panic swept through the crowd. Parents, children, and crew members scrambled toward the exits, trying to escape the growing inferno. The intense heat began to melt parts of the set, and in the chaos, some children got trapped. One terrifying moment stood out. A young girl became stuck on a Ferris wheel prop. Xuxa's bodyguard, Leandro Nilsson, saw what was happening and didn't hesitate. He ran straight through the fire to rescue the girl, risking his own life to save hers. He managed to get her out, but the fire kept spreading. Despite the chaos, some cameras continued recording, capturing the disaster as it unfolded. That footage would later be broadcast across Brazil, shocking millions. By the time firefighters brought the blaze under control, the damage was overwhelming. A total of 26 people were injured, most from smoke inhalation. 2 children, aged 7 and 10, suffered severe burns. An adult who helped with the rescue efforts was also badly hurt. While no one died, the trauma was deep and lasting. The cheerful world of Xuxa Park had turned into a nightmare. Xuxa herself, though unharmed, was emotionally devastated. Known for her close connection with children, she was heartbroken by what had happened. In the days that followed, she visited the victims in the hospital, offering comfort and support, but the emotional toll was undeniable. Investigators later confirmed the fire was caused by an electrical short circuit in the spaceship prop. There was no foul play, just a tragic accident. Still, the impact was huge. Zusha Park, which had been on the air since 1994, was immediately put on hold. Globo, the network behind it, decided to cancel the show for good. 8 unaired episodes were permanently shelved out of respect for those affected. The set was destroyed, and the magic that once filled it was gone. Zusha never returned to children's television in the same way again. For the children in that audience, and the millions who watched her every weekend, Zusha Park was more than a show. It was a piece of childhood. But after that day, it became a painful memory. No lives were lost, but the fire ended an era and left emotional scars that would last a lifetime. March 6, 1995, started like any other day in Lake Orion, Michigan. No one could have predicted that within 72 hours, a shocking on-air moment would spiral into cold-blooded murder. Scott Amador, a 32-year-old bartender known for his big heart and infectious energy, appeared on The Jenny Jones Show, a daytime talk show infamous for its jaw-dropping surprises. That day's segment, Secret Crush, the idea was simple. Bring people on, let them confess their hidden romantic feelings and watch the drama unfold. But what happened next was anything but simple. Scott's secret crush was Jonathan Schmitz, a 24-year-old man he had known for years. Jonathan, completely unaware that he was about to be the center of attention, walked onto the stage with no idea what was coming. When Scott's feelings were revealed, Jonathan laughed it off, visibly uncomfortable, making it clear he was straight. The audience cheered, the cameras rolled, and the moment seemed to pass without incident. But behind the awkward smiles and nervous laughter, something dark was brewing. 3 days later, Scott Amador was dead. It started with a simple note, one that Scott playfully left in Jonathan's mailbox. Maybe it was a joke. Maybe it was a way to keep the conversation going. But whatever Scott's intention, the reaction was something no one saw coming. Humiliated, furious, and unable to shake the weight of that moment on national television, Jonathan withdrew money from his bank, drove to a store, and bought a shotgun. His mind was made up. What happened next was pure horror. Jonathan drove straight to Scott's mobile home, knocked on the door, and asked one chilling question. "Did you leave me that note?" Scott smiled and said yes. Without hesitation, Jonathan turned, retrieved his gun from the car, and came back. Before Scott could react, before he could plead or even process the danger, Jonathan raised the shotgun and fired, twice. The bullets tore through Scott's chest. Within moments, he was gone. Jonathan didn't run. He didn't hide. Instead, he drove to a nearby gas station, called 911, and calmly admitted to everything. His reason? Humiliation. The case exploded in the media, quickly earning the name The Jenny Jones Murder. People demanded answers. Had Jonathan been manipulated by the show's producers? He insisted he had been led to believe his admirer would be a woman. The show's team denied it. But one thing was clear. This wasn't just a murder. This was a tragic consequence of reality television pushing the boundaries of entertainment. Jonathan was arrested and charged with first-degree murder. His defense argued that he acted under extreme emotional distress, pointing to past mental health struggles. But was this an impulsive crime or a calculated execution? In 1996, he was convicted of second-degree murder and sentenced to 25 to 50 years in prison. The twists didn't stop there. His conviction was overturned on appeal. Then, in a 1999 retrial, he was found guilty again and sent back to prison. But even that wasn't the end. In 2017, after serving 22 years, Jonathan was released on parole. The decision reignited the pain for Scott's family, who believed Jonathan had never truly shown remorse. Their attorney, Jeffrey Feger, called it an insult to justice. But there was one more battle left to fight. Scott's family sued The Jenny Jones Show and its parent company, Warner Brothers, accusing them of reckless exploitation. They won. $9.3 million in damages. But just like before, justice slipped through their fingers. The ruling was overturned, with courts deciding that the show couldn't have foreseen the tragedy that followed. To this day, the case stands as a chilling reminder of how reality TV, built on shock and spectacle, can have deadly consequences. Shows like The Jenny Jones Show thrived on embarrassment and surprise, never stopping to consider what would happen when the cameras stopped rolling. Could Scott Amager still be alive if Jonathan had been given more information? If the producers had handled things differently, would this tragedy have been avoided? No one can say for sure, but one thing is clear. For Scott, what started as a moment of laughter turned into a death sentence. And for the world, the Jenny Jones murder exposed the terrifying truth about turning real emotions into entertainment. Sometimes the cost is irreversible. In the long and tangled history of American public life, few moments captured the nation's attention with such a startling mixture of disbelief, shock, and sober fascination as the assassination of Lee Harvey Oswald. This event did not unfold in secrecy or within the confined corners of an official report. Instead, it played out live on national television, in front of millions of viewers who were already shaken by the assassination of President John F. Kennedy only 2 days earlier. On November 24, 1963, television audiences tuned in expecting to witness a routine prisoner transfer from the Dallas police headquarters to the county jail. It was meant to be a procedural step in the ongoing investigation into Kennedy's death, and viewers were prepared for nothing more than a brief and uneventful update. What they witnessed instead was a moment that would become etched permanently into American memory, a moment when the ordinary course of events shattered in an instant and turned into one of the most unsettling live broadcasts in the history of the medium. As Oswald emerged into the basement corridor, flanked by Dallas detectives, the atmosphere appeared controlled and straightforward. Reporters crowded close, cameras rolled steadily, and police officers guided Oswald toward the waiting vehicle that was to take him to his next destination. Then, without warning, Jack Ruby, a Dallas nightclub owner who had managed to slip into the gathered crowd, stepped forward and fired a single shot into Oswald's abdomen. The live broadcast captured everything: the expression of shock on Oswald's face, the frantic movement of officers as they tried to subdue Ruby, the shouts of reporters who could not quite comprehend what they had just witnessed, and the abrupt silence that followed when the reality settled in. Millions of Americans sat stunned in their living rooms, confronted with a level of immediacy and unfiltered violence the television had never delivered before. The effect was profound. Viewers had not read about this event after the fact, nor had they heard it through secondhand reports. They had seen it as it happened, and this raw exposure deeply affected the national consciousness. The assassination of Lee Harvey Oswald occupies a unique and lasting place in American memory, not simply because it removed the one man who might have provided direct answers about President Kennedy's death, but because of the way it demonstrated the extraordinary power of television to capture history at its most volatile. In that brief moment in the Dallas police basement, the boundary between news and lived reality collapsed. The nation was forced to confront the idea that public events, even those under official supervision, could erupt into chaos without warning. This broadcast marked a turning point in how Americans understood the relationship between media, violence, and public accountability. It revealed both the capacity of television to inform and its ability to deliver trauma directly into the home, without preparation or context. The footage has been replayed for decades in documentaries, news specials, and classrooms, each viewing renewing the unsettling immediacy of that Sunday morning. The live transmission of Oswald's death reshaped public expectations of media transparency, while also raising difficult questions about the psychological impact of witnessing real violence as it unfolds. It remains one of the most significant and haunting examples of the moment when technological progress collided with national tragedy, leaving behind a legacy that continues to influence the way Americans perceive both history and the media that records it. If there was ever a moment in American history that played out like a surreal crime drama, Live, unfiltered, and utterly shocking, it was the shooting of Lee Harvey Oswald on November 24, 1963. Just 2 days earlier, the nation had been devastated by the assassination of President John F. Kennedy, who was shot while riding in a motorcade through Dallas, Texas. The prime suspect, Lee Harvey Oswald, had been swiftly arrested, and though his guilt was widely assumed, he had not yet stood trial. He was a former Marine, a drifter, a defector to the Soviet Union, and an enigmatic figure with many unanswered questions swirling around him. The country was hungry for answers, but those answers died with Oswald, in front of a live television audience. It all happened at the Dallas Police Headquarters, where Oswald was being transferred from the city jail to the county jail. The building was crawling with reporters, flashing cameras, and tense law enforcement officers. The press had been alerted to the transfer, and in a decision that would be heavily criticized later, they were allowed to watch from the basement garage. Oswald, handcuffed and flanked by police officers, was led out through a corridor in what was meant to be a routine transfer. But just as he stepped into the garage, a man suddenly lunged forward from the crowd, raised a small .38 caliber revolver, and fired a single shot into Oswald's abdomen. The shooter was Jack Ruby, a 52-year-old Dallas nightclub owner with ties to the criminal underworld and a fondness for the local police. His motives, to this day, remain clouded in mystery. Ruby later claimed that he was overwhelmed with grief and anger over Kennedy's death and wanted to spare Jacqueline Kennedy the agony of a drawn-out trial. But many weren't convinced. Conspiracy theories immediately exploded. Was Ruby silencing Oswald on behalf of the Mafia, the CIA, foreign powers, or was he just a deranged man looking for his moment in the spotlight? The fact that Ruby had such easy access to Oswald right inside a police station only fueled suspicions of a deeper cover-up. Millions of Americans watched the event unfold in real time. It was the first homicide ever broadcast live on national television. Viewers saw Oswald grimace in pain, collapse to the floor, and be quickly surrounded by stunned officers. He was rushed to Parkland Memorial Hospital, the same hospital where Kennedy had been pronounced dead just 2 days earlier. But Oswald didn't survive. With that single gunshot, the opportunity to fully unravel the truth behind the president's assassination vanished. In the aftermath, Ruby was arrested and eventually convicted of murder. He was sentenced to death, but his conviction was overturned on appeal. Before he could be retried, Ruby died of cancer in 1967. To this day, countless books, films, documentaries, and investigations have tried to piece together the puzzle of what really happened in those chaotic days. The Warren Commission concluded that both Oswald and Ruby acted alone, but that answer has satisfied few. For many, Oswald's live execution only deepened the mystery and left wounds in the American psyche that have never fully healed. The killing of Lee Harvey Oswald wasn't just a bizarre moment in television history. It was a turning point that left an entire nation haunted, not just by what they had seen, but by what they would never know. It was a clear, sunny Tuesday morning in New York City on September 11th, 2001, the kind of day that felt too normal to ever be remembered for anything. People were heading to work, grabbing coffee, checking voicemails on chunky flip phones, completely unaware that the world as they knew it was about to change forever. At 8:46 a.m., the first sign that something was very wrong came in the form of American Airlines Flight 11, which slammed into the North Tower of the World Trade Center. Smoke billowed from the building as news channels scrambled to cover what initially looked like a horrific accident. Anchors speculated about a small plane, pilot error, or some kind of navigation failure. Cameramen zoomed in on the gaping hole. Firefighters were rushing in, and nobody quite knew what to make of it. Then, 17 minutes later, while the world was still trying to process what had just happened, the second plane showed up, and this one arrived on live television. At exactly 9:03 a.m., United Airlines Flight 175 came into frame like something out of a nightmare. It flew low and fast, banking ever so slightly before plunging straight into the South Tower in a fiery explosion that left millions of people around the globe staring at their TVs in pure shock. This wasn't a replay, and it definitely wasn't a movie. It was real, it was live, and it was devastating. The moment the second plane hit, the narrative changed instantly. This wasn't some bizarre accident, it was an attack. A coordinated, deliberate, terrifying attack. News anchors went from confused to horrified in real time, their voices cracking as they tried to make sense of what they were witnessing. Many people watching at home didn't even realize what was happening until it was over. Some thought it was a special effect or a re-airing of the first crash. But no, this was different. This was history unfolding in the most terrifying and unfiltered way imaginable. Multiple camera angles caught the second strike, news helicopters hovering above Manhattan, amateur videographers on the ground, and even tourists who just happened to be pointing their camcorders at the towers. One particularly famous clip, captured by the French filmmaker brothers Jules and Gédéon Naudet, shows a group of firefighters preparing to respond to the first crash when the second plane suddenly roars overhead and slams into the South Tower. The firefighters' reactions are a mix of awe, disbelief, and raw fear, and it mirrors what everyone else was feeling at that moment. That second impact made everything horrifyingly clear. America was under attack, and this was only the beginning of what would become one of the darkest days in modern history. The footage of the second plane strike quickly became one of the most replayed and analyzed video clips in the world. It's now a permanent part of history, archived, dissected, and remembered by anyone who lived through it. In many ways, that live broadcast forced the world to collectively witness the horror as it happened. It was the moment that tore away the illusion of safety and ushered in an era of fear, resilience, war, and global change. Watching the second plane hit the South Tower live wasn't just a shocking TV moment. It was a front-row seat to a tragedy that would reshape the 21st century. The footage didn't just capture a building being hit. It captured the instant a nation realized everything had changed. On August 23, 2010, what began as a peaceful morning in Manila, Philippines quickly spiraled into a national nightmare. A disgruntled former police officer named Rolando Mendoza hijacked a tourist bus in Rizal Park, holding 25 people hostage. Mendoza, 55, had been dismissed from the Philippine National Police months earlier over extortion charges he insisted were false. Desperate to clear his name and get his job back, Mendoza saw the hostage situation as his last shot at justice. But what started as a plea for reinstatement soon turned deadly. Inside that bus were 22 tourists from Hong Kong and 3 Filipinos, a driver, a tour guide, and a photographer. For 11 tense hours, the world watched as a standoff unfolded live on television. At first, things seemed somewhat under control. Negotiators managed to talk Mendoza into releasing several hostages. But as the day dragged on, his mood darkened. What pushed him over the edge was something he saw on the bus's TV. His own brother, Gregorio Mendoza, also a police officer, being arrested on live television. Gregorio had come to help calm the situation, but authorities suspected him of aiding the hijacking. Watching his brother taken away in handcuffs was the final straw. Mendoza snapped. The tension exploded into terror. One of the hostages, Mrs. Leong, would later describe how her husband had bravely tried to disarm Mendoza but was tragically killed. Through her heartbreak, she stayed strong, clinging to the hope of seeing her children again. As Mendoza's threats became more violent, the urgency to act grew. He warned over the radio that he had already harmed hostages and was prepared to kill more. Yet the police response was slow, confused, and ultimately disastrous. When the assault team finally moved in, things quickly went wrong. Mendoza, still watching the news coverage, was essentially getting a live feed of the police's every move. The media, without realizing it, had given him an edge. He fired shots as police tried to breach the bus, creating chaos and confusion. Officers hesitated, unsure how to proceed. They smashed windows, tried the back door, and retreated under fire. After hours of failed rescue attempts, snipers were finally ordered to take the shot. Mendoza was killed, but by then it was too late. 8 hostages had lost their lives. The survivors, some bleeding and in shock, stumbled out of the bus. Emergency responders rushed in, but the damage was already done. One of the most haunting moments came when the bus driver, Alberto Lubang, escaped and ran toward police, yelling that everyone was dead. His words hit like a gut punch and revealed just how badly the situation had spiraled out of control. The backlash was swift and fierce. In Hong Kong, where the victims were from, public outrage exploded. Families demanded justice. The Philippine government issued an apology, but tensions between the two regions simmered for years. A full investigation was launched, led by then Justice Secretary Leila de Lima, exposing one failure after another. It turned out the police had no real training in handling high-risk hostage scenarios. They missed key chances to neutralize Mendoza earlier. Worse still, the media's live coverage had unintentionally sabotaged the rescue effort. Several top officials were suspended or demoted, including Manila's police chief. The public demanded reforms, and they got some. New training programs were introduced, including a specialized tourist police unit. But for many, the changes came too late. The scars from that day still linger. Survivors and families continue to search for closure. The images from that day, the terrified faces, the broken glass, the heartbreak, remain etched into history. The Manila hostage crisis wasn't just a tragedy. It was a painful lesson in what can happen when preparation fails and desperation takes hold. January 16, 2009. A routine television broadcast was about to take an unexpected, heartbreaking turn, one that would leave viewers frozen in disbelief. Israeli journalist Shlomi Eldar was preparing for a standard political interview with Foreign Minister Tzipi Livni. It was supposed to be another segment about the war in Gaza, another discussion about military operations and diplomatic tensions. But then, his phone rang. It was Dr. Izzeldin Abuelaish, a Palestinian doctor known for his unwavering commitment to peace. He had spent years working in Israeli hospitals, healing patients regardless of nationality, believing that medicine could bridge even the deepest divides. But this time, his voice was different. It was shaking, frantic, filled with terror. Then came the words that stopped everything. His home in Gaza had just been hit by an airstrike. His daughters were inside, 3 of them, Besson, Meyer, Aya, along with his niece, all dead. A stunned silence filled the studio. This was no longer about politics or war strategies. This was a father, live on air, breaking apart in real time. Eldar, barely able to process what he was hearing, made a split-second decision. He put the call on speaker. Suddenly, the entire nation was pulled into the moment. Viewers could hear Dr. Abuelaish's raw, unfiltered agony, his voice cracking, his breath ragged, his words barely forming through the sobs. In the background, the screams of his surviving children pierced the airwaves, their terror and grief spilling into every home that was watching. It was no longer a news report, it was a nightmare, unfolding live. Through his sobs, Dr. Abuelaish begged for help. Some of his family members were still alive, but trapped. Medical aid couldn't reach them. Roads were blocked. Every second meant life or death. He pleaded, desperate, his voice filled with a pain no parent should ever have to endure. Eldar, visibly shaken, turned to the cameras and urged the Israeli Defense Forces to act. This wasn't about governments or borders anymore. This was about saving innocent lives. The moment sent shockwaves through Israel. For many, it was the first time they saw the war not as numbers on a screen, but as real people, real families, being torn apart. The line between us and them blurred in an instant. Suddenly, no one could look away. Dr. Abuelaish's daughters were more than just casualties of war. Besson had been studying business, passionate about making a difference. Mayar dreamed of following in her father's footsteps, becoming a doctor to save lives. Aya, the youngest, loved poetry and had a future full of possibilities ahead of her. In one instant, all of it was gone. But even in his grief, Dr. Abuelaish refused to give in to hatred. Instead of revenge, he chose peace. He wrote a memoir, I Shall Not Hate, a Gaza doctor's journey on the road to peace and human dignity. He traveled the world, speaking about the need for coexistence, for humanity beyond politics. He was nominated for the Nobel Peace Prize 5 times, and yet the pain never left him. That night, his cries on live television became one of the most haunting moments in history, a moment that shattered the illusion of war as a distant conflict, a moment that made the world listen. It was more than a tragedy, it was a wake-up call, and though it couldn't bring his daughters back, it forced people to see what war truly costs, not in numbers, not in headlines, but in human lives that are lost forever. On the morning of January 28, 1986, millions of Americans sat glued to their television screens. unaware that they were about to witness one of the most tragic moments in space exploration history. The Space Shuttle Challenger was set to launch on mission STS-51L, and for the first time, a civilian teacher, Krista McAuliffe, would be among the crew. McAuliffe, chosen from thousands of applicants for NASA's Teacher in Space program, had captured the nation's imagination. Classrooms across the country watched in anticipation, eager for a glimpse of history as she prepared to deliver lessons from orbit. There was a sense of pride, hope, and excitement in the air. The launch promised to be a symbol of American ingenuity and human aspiration. At 11:38 a.m. Eastern Time, the Challenger lifted off from Kennedy Space Center in Florida. For a brief moment, the shuttle soared with all the power and grace one expects from a vehicle that represents years of engineering and human effort. Families and school children cheered, their eyes tracking the small object ascending into the sky, imagining McAuliffe floating weightlessly, waving to the world. Then, 73 seconds into flight, disaster struck. The shuttle broke apart in a violent explosion, a plume of smoke and fire filling the sky, transmitted live into millions of living rooms. There was no warning. The television screens froze the horror. What was meant to be a moment of inspiration had turned into tragedy. The cause of the disaster was later determined to be a failure of the O-ring seals on one of the solid rocket boosters. It was an unusually cold morning, and the rubber O-rings, which were supposed to prevent hot gases from escaping, lost their flexibility. The hot gases burned through the external fuel tank, leading to the catastrophic breakup of the shuttle. All 7 crew members, Francis Scobie, Michael Smith, Judith Resnick, Ellison Onizuka, Gregory Jarvis, Ronald McNair, and Krista McAuliffe, lost their lives. The nation mourned collectively as the tragedy had unfolded in real time before the eyes of the world. The Challenger disaster was especially devastating because it shattered the sense of security many had about space travel. Unlike accidents that occur behind the scenes, this one was broadcast live, turning it into a shared trauma. Children who had been watching school lessons on television were suddenly confronted with the fragility of human life and the dangers inherent in exploration. Teachers, students, and families were reminded that even the most carefully planned missions could go wrong. The images, etched into the national memory, spurred debates about safety, accountability, and the pressures placed on NASA during the shuttle program's ambitious schedule. In the aftermath, the Rogers Commission investigated the disaster, revealing not only technical flaws but also organizational failures within NASA. Engineers had warned that the O-rings could fail in cold weather, but these warnings had been overlooked. The tragedy led to a 2.5-year hiatus in the shuttle program and a thorough reassessment of NASA's approach to safety and management. It was a painful but necessary turning point, forcing the organization to confront its assumptions and prioritize human life above schedules and ambition. The Challenger disaster remains a somber reminder of the risks of exploration, the responsibility of leadership, and the courage of those who dare to venture into the unknown. It is remembered not only for the lives lost, but also for the national experience of witnessing the tragedy unfold live on television, a moment that united Americans in grief and reflection. Krista McAuliffe's dream of teaching from space may have ended in heartbreak, but her legacy continues to inspire curiosity, courage, and the pursuit of knowledge. The tragic story of Daniel V. Jones is one of those moments that left a permanent scar on live television history, and even more so on how we view desperation, mental health, and the healthcare system. On April 30th, 1998, during the busy afternoon rush hour in Los Angeles, 40-year-old Jones drove his white pickup truck onto an overpass of the 110 freeway near Harbor City, parked his vehicle, and staged a disturbing protest that would soon unfold live on countless TV screens across America. Jones wasn't just some random man with a grudge. He was someone suffering from both cancer and HIV, feeling utterly let down by his HMO, which he claimed had failed him repeatedly. According to letters and videos he had prepared ahead of time, Jones was furious over delays in treatment, a lack of compassion, and what he felt was a system more interested in profit than people. When he stopped his car that day, he had a shotgun, several handwritten protest signs, a gasoline canister, a video camera, and heartbreakingly, his dog with him. Television helicopters arrived swiftly, and news stations, perhaps sensing something dramatic unfolding, began broadcasting the standoff live. For over an hour, the nation watched as Jones held up signs blaming HMOs for prioritizing money over lives, urging people to live freely and fight for safer health care. At one point, in a moment that deeply disturbed viewers, he released his dog from the truck only to tragically shoot it moments later, a gesture that left many shocked and confused. But the most horrifying moment was still to come. After standing atop his truck and pouring gasoline over himself, Jones, still being filmed in real time, lit himself on fire and then, while engulfed in flames, took his own life with a single shotgun blast to the head. The camera captured everything. Several stations, caught off guard and without a time delay, broadcast the entire sequence live to unsuspecting viewers, including children who happened to be watching TV that afternoon. The backlash was immediate and fierce. News networks were slammed for airing something so graphic without warning, and the incident led to many stations reevaluating their live coverage policies. But beyond the media firestorm, Jones's final act raised haunting questions about the state of America's healthcare system. Was he mentally ill, pushed to the edge by disease and despair? Or was this a calculated, tragic message to the world? A final cry for help and justice from someone who felt invisible? In his pre-recorded tapes and notes, Jones made it clear that he didn't want to die in silence. He wanted people to know how deeply he had suffered, not just from illness, but from neglect and bureaucracy. While many were understandably horrified by the nature of his protest, others couldn't help but acknowledge the bitter truth behind his anger. His suicide, as gruesome and tragic as it was, brought attention to the very real pain of navigating a broken healthcare system. Today, the Daniel V. Jones incident remains one of the most unforgettable and chilling moments ever aired on live TV. It's remembered not just for its shock value, but for the man behind the flames, a man who felt so unheard and unsupported that he chose to make his final stand in the most public way possible. His death was not just a protest. It was a cry for dignity in a world that had, by his account, stripped him of it. On January 2nd, 2023, during a nationally televised Monday Night Football game between the Buffalo Bills and the Cincinnati Bengals, a horrifying moment unfolded that stunned millions of viewers and shook the entire sports world. Damar Hamlin, a 24-year-old safety for the Buffalo Bills, collapsed suddenly on the field after executing what initially appeared to be a routine tackle. In the first quarter of the game, Hamlin tackled Bengals wide receiver T. Higgins, rose to his feet briefly, and then abruptly fell backward onto the turf, unresponsive. What followed was one of the most distressing scenes ever broadcast during a live sporting event. Medical personnel rushed onto the field within seconds. It became clear this was no ordinary injury. Hamlin had suffered cardiac arrest. First responders administered CPR on the field for nearly 10 minutes, and an automated external defibrillator, AED, was used to restart his heart. Players from both teams formed a solemn circle around Hamlin, many of them kneeling in prayer or openly weeping, unable to hold back emotion as their teammate and opponent fought for his life right in front of them. The gravity of the situation was felt not only by those in the stadium, but by the millions watching at home. The ESPN broadcast, caught in a moment with no precedent, shifted into solemn silence and careful updates. Commentators, clearly shaken, did their best to communicate facts without adding to the panic. What had been a normal football game had instantly turned into a life-and-death emergency broadcast live across the world. The NFL made the decision to suspend and ultimately cancel the game, a rare move, especially in such a high-stakes, late-season matchup. But at that moment, football no longer mattered. Hamlin was transported by ambulance to the University of Cincinnati Medical Center, where he was listed in critical condition and placed on a ventilator. The diagnosis was later revealed to be commotio cordis, a rare and often deadly condition where a sudden blow to the chest during a critical window in the heart's rhythm causes it to stop. The odds of surviving such an event are slim, especially without immediate response. But thanks to the quick action of medical personnel, the presence of emergency equipment, and proper training, Damar Hamlin's life was saved. Over the next few days, updates on Hamlin's condition were closely followed across the country. Messages of support flooded in from fellow athletes, celebrities, fans, and even political leaders. His Toy Drive charity, originally created with a modest goal, raised millions of dollars almost overnight as people sought some way to show support. By January 11th, just 9 days later, Hamlin was discharged from the hospital and began his journey toward recovery. his story didn't end there. Hamlin made a remarkable recovery and, in a turn that many deemed miraculous, returned to the NFL field later that same year. More than just a football player, he became a symbol of hope, resilience, and the importance of emergency preparedness in sports. He partnered with the American Heart Association, campaigned for wider access to CPR training, and spoke openly about his experience to raise awareness about cardiac health. The incident sparked a national conversation about player safety and emergency medical response, not just in professional sports, but at all levels of competition. It served as a stark reminder that behind every jersey is a human life, and that split-second decisions and proper medical support can make the difference between tragedy and survival. Damar Hamlin's collapse was one of the most terrifying moments in recent sports history, but it ultimately became a story of survival, unity, and the power of quick action and collective care. It was December 14th, 1982 in Rio de Janeiro, a day that would go down as one of the most haunting in Brazilian television history. Maria Erinalda da Silva, just 23 years old, walked into a TV studio with her 9-month-old daughter, Danubia, cradled in her arms. The baby was critically ill, suffering from a rare eye condition that caused severe bleeding and pain. Maria had spent months begging hospitals for help. She went from Pedro Ernesto to Souza Aguiar and others in between, only to be turned away each time. No beds, no doctors, no answers. Her daughter was slipping away, and no one seemed willing or able to stop it. Desperate and out of options, Maria turned to television. She'd heard that a show called O Povo na TV sometimes featured real people's stories, often exposing injustice and corruption. The show was a popular mix of gritty reporting and sensationalism, hosted by big names like Wilton Franco, Wagner Montes, and Sergio Mamberti. It thrived on intense, emotional stories, and Maria hoped that maybe, just maybe, going on air could bring some help. She arrived at the studio around 11 a.m., anxiously waiting for the 1 p.m. live broadcast. When she was finally called to the stage at 1:40, Danubia's condition had gotten visibly worse. Holding her baby close, Maria told her story. She explained the countless rejections and the hospitals that kept shutting their doors. The hosts listened and criticized the failing healthcare system while the camera zoomed in, capturing Danubia's fragile face for the nation to see. But as Maria spoke, something tragic unfolded. Danubia was dying, right there on live television. Viewers watched in disbelief as the baby's body grew still. Just 40 minutes into the broadcast, Danubia passed away in her mother's arms. But the show didn't stop. The hosts kept talking about hospital failures, about bureaucracy, about injustice. But for those at home, the unthinkable had just happened. They had witnessed a child's final breath on live TV. After the cameras finally cut, an ambulance arrived to take Danubia's body to the Forensic Medical Institute. Maria left the studio devastated, still holding her lifeless daughter. O Povo na TV continued with its usual programming as if nothing had happened. No pause, no moment of silence, no real acknowledgement of the tragedy that had just unfolded on their stage. The reaction was swift and furious. Just 3 days later, a major newspaper published a scathing editorial accusing the show of turning a real-life death into entertainment. The broadcast, many said, had crossed an ethical line. The outrage spread quickly. Viewers and critics alike were appalled that the show not only aired such a sensitive moment, but did so without stepping in, without compassion, without care. While O Povo na TV had always flirted with controversy, this moment became a breaking point. The show kept going for a while, but it never fully recovered. Then, in 1984, it was shut down for good, this time due to another scandal. One of its regular guests, Roberto Lenruber, who claimed to be a healer, was exposed for offering fake medical treatments on air. He and host Wilton Franco were both arrested for fraudulent medical practices. Even after the show ended, the memory of that day in 1982 lingered. Danubia's death remained one of the darkest moments in Brazilian broadcast history, not just for the loss, but for how it was handled. A mother's plea, a dying baby, and an audience who watched helplessly. Years later, Maria expressed mixed feelings. She was still grateful to Franco for giving her a platform when hospitals didn't. But for the rest of Brazil, the incident remains a powerful reminder of just how far is too far, especially when real lives are at stake. It was 2016 in Moscow, Russia. The cameras were rolling. The lights were bright. The audience of the popular television show Pro Lyubov, about love, was ready for an evening of light-hearted entertainment. They had no idea they were about to witness something they would never forget. That night, the show had planned something special. A live performance featuring a bear. Not just any bear, but Bona. A massive brown bear dressed in a red and yellow skirt with a matching hat. She looked almost comical, almost charming, almost safe, but Bona was still a wild animal. Her handler, dressed flamboyantly in a flamenco outfit, guided her onto the stage. A heavy leather muzzle covered her jaws. A thick leash kept her movements controlled. To keep her calm, the handler fed her treats through the small opening in the muzzle. Everything seemed to be going smoothly. Bona twirled in circles on command. The audience clapped and laughed. The cameras zoomed in on her massive frame as she performed her tricks. And then, it happened. A young presenter, filming a segment about wild animal safety, stepped forward. Maybe she wanted to make the moment more interactive. Maybe she wanted to prove a point. Maybe she simply forgot what she was dealing with. She reached out her hand. A second of hesitation, a shift in the air, and then Bona turned, fast. With the sheer, raw power of nature itself, her massive paw swiped through the air and caught hold of the presenter's clothing. The force of it yanked the woman downward with a terrifying thud. The room went silent. The studio audience, once so full of laughter, now sat frozen in place. The cameraman, trained to capture every moment, instinctively took a step back. For a split second, the tension was unbearable. Would Bona attack? Would she strike again? Would the situation spiral into something far, far worse? And then, just as suddenly as it began, it stopped. Bona, as if losing interest, let go. Her handler reacted instantly, pulling the leash taut, yanking the bear back with force. He barked commands, reprimanding the presenter, not the bear. The young woman staggered to her feet, her face pale, her breath unsteady. No blood, no visible injuries, but the terror in her eyes told the real story. She mumbled an apology. To whom? No one could say. To the audience? To the handler? To the bear? But the real question hung heavy in the air. What if Bona hadn't stopped? The bear was led off the stage, but the unease remained. It was a chilling reminder of something that had been overlooked in the bright lights and scripted performances. A bear in a costume is still a bear. For years, animal rights organizations like PETA had warned about the dangers of using wild animals in entertainment. Bears like Bona were deprived of hibernation, kept in captivity, forced to perform under unnatural conditions. They were trained, but they were not tame. Even the most experienced handler couldn't erase the instinct that lay just beneath the surface. The moment that presenter stepped too close, the illusion shattered. In that instant, Bona was not a performer. She was a predator. The show was planned for entertainment. Instead, they got a wake-up call. That night, millions of viewers saw the terrifying truth. No amount of training, no costume, no muzzle could fully control an animal that was never meant to be on a stage. And for the young presenter whose segment was supposed to warn about the dangers of wild animals, the irony was cruel. Because now, she was the warning. Imagine tuning in to your local news on a chilly January morning in 1987, expecting the usual mix of traffic reports, weather updates, and perhaps a story about a cute puppy rescued from a tree. Now imagine that, instead of the usual, you witness something so shocking it sears itself into your memory forever. This is exactly what happened to viewers and reporters on January 22, 1987, when R. Bud Dwyer, the Pennsylvania state treasurer, turned a routine press conference into one of the most infamous live TV tragedies in American history. Dwyer, A man embroiled in a web of corruption allegations took the unthinkable step of ending his own life on camera, in front of stunned journalists and a nation watching from their living rooms. Yes, we're talking about a suicide that played out in real time, with all the raw immediacy that only live television can deliver. There were no reruns, no edits, no chance to look away before it happened. For many, the event shattered the comforting illusion that public figures' worst moments are safely confined to history books or late-night recaps. This was happening here and now, in real life, in full motion. Dwyer's story is a bizarre blend of politics, scandal, and human drama, and it reads like a plot twist no Hollywood screenwriter would dare pitch. He wasn't a shadowy figure lurking in the background. He was the treasurer of Pennsylvania, a prominent politician responsible for managing the state's finances. Yet, behind the polished public persona was a man facing serious bribery and conspiracy charges, a conviction hanging over his head like a guillotine. Most people would spend the weeks leading up to sentencing, quietly preparing their defense, consulting lawyers, or reflecting on life choices. But Dwyer decided to do something radically different. He called a press conference. Not just any press conference, but one that would become an unforgettable, horrifying spectacle. It was meant, he said, to clear his conscience, to set the record straight. Instead, it became a shocking reminder of how unpredictable and tragic life can be, especially when played out live on TV. The live TV element of the incident is what makes it truly unforgettable and, frankly, surreal. Television has always had a way of making events feel immediate, intimate, and personal. We watch the news to feel informed, not traumatized. But on that fateful morning, viewers experienced something they weren't prepared for. Reporters who had come expecting statements about politics and public service instead found themselves witnessing a man's final, fatal act. The cameras were rolling, the microphones were live, and in one horrifying instant, Dwyer transformed a routine political appearance into a broadcast that would haunt journalists and audiences for decades. In a sense, it was the perfect storm of media, politics, and human despair. A moment where public duty, personal crisis, and the relentless eye of the camera collided in a way that no one could forget. Even today, the Bud Dwyer incident remains a cultural touchstone, not because people enjoy morbid spectacle, but because it illustrates the strange power of live television, the way it can turn ordinary events into unforgettable moments, for better or worse. It's a story that is part cautionary tale, part tragedy, and part uncomfortably compelling slice of history that reminds us just how raw and unpredictable the world can be when the record button is on. So, buckle up, because diving into the story of Bud Dwyer means stepping into a tale of politics, scandal, and human emotion, all viewed through the unforgiving lens of a live broadcast that would etch itself into the collective memory of a generation.